What is up, YouTube? The official Talking TV podcast is back with a vengeance in its normal Sunday slot. We took sort of a break last week. Dustin and I teamed up to do the Paul Dano Actors Hall of Fame for September, but we are back with what I'm liking to call September as bonus month, which since they pushed all the movies that were supposed to come out this month because of the writer's strike, we still stand in solidarity with the writers and the actors, who apparently a deal is supposedly set to be being made this week. We'll see if that actually happens or not, depending on if the AMPTP can get its shit together. But I'm joined for a very, very special episode by somebody who co-hosted a previous Directors Hall of Fame that we did a couple weeks ago, the famed Miyazaki Studio Ghibli Hall of Fame, Nathaniel Ahart. Nathaniel, glad to have you back on, dude.
Absolutely, and I'm glad to have this on my channel as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Obviously, the second cross collaboration we're doing here, a very fruitful venture so far. And of course, with us today, we have another extra guest, and I couldn't be more happy, as Dom can agree with me as well, to have on Rye movie guy himself, Mr. Ryan Maguire. Thank you for joining us today on this very, very special episode about who I think we can all agree is one of our favorite filmmakers.
Yes, absolutely. Ryan, happy to have you on, man.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Get to talk some Scorsese with some good friends of mine. This is the life. So
that's perfect. The perfect sentiment. Yes, as my two co-hosts have alluded to, we are doing the Directors Hall of Fame entry for the one, the only Mr. Martin Scorsese, said to be the champion of the true cinema itself. His next film, and I gotta check, Nathaniel, you'll have to help me out with what number of movie this is, but with his new film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is set to hit theaters, his first theatrical movie in 7 years after 2019's The Irishman, which went directly to Netflix. It is Killers of the Flower Moon is based off the popular novel about the murders of the Osage Indian Native American tribe that occurred after oil was found on their land. It will star Leonardo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro, along with several other people. Guys, we are here to talk about him. We are here to break down. We are here to figure out what it is that makes this guy one of, if not the greatest living director we have right now. This is the Martin Scorsese Hall of Fame here on the Talking TV podcast. All right, guys, Scorsese, he has made himself out to be the number one enemy of Marvel Studios in the last couple of years with his comments that Marvel is not true cinema. He has been hailed as the greatest living, it has to be the greatest living director that we have working right now. He has had one of the longest careers, stretching all the way back into not just the 70s, but the late 60s when he first got his start. And I just wanted to start off with this. I'm going to start with Ryan, since this is your first time on the channel, and then we'll go over to Nathaniel. What was the first Scorsese movie that you ever saw? What was the first time you became aware of him? And around what time would you say that he really started to like influence your love of movies?
Well, I think I always knew of his films, but I didn't know of Scorsese the person. I remember when Departed came out, and that was a big deal, but mostly because of the actors. I didn't know who Scorsese was. The first one that I saw that's still one of my favorites, which we'll talk about later, is Casino. I was so Nathaniel knows this. I'm a freak when it comes to movies. Movies have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And Scorsese was a huge part of when I started to appreciate film as an art form. And Casino was my introduction. And of course, I think that there's another gangster film, again, we'll talk about that later, that I think does it better. But I still love Casino, and that was the one that made me realize a director not only has a vision and basically carries the production, but you start to see where that lands in the grand scheme of somebody's filmography. Guillermo del Toro has talked about that before, where it's like, it's not just a filmography, it's like a biography. Everything you're creating not only represents the time that you made something in, but it kind of talks about what's going on in your life or what informs you at the time. And so I was already starting to pick up on that even when I was like, oh man, I saw that when I was like 11 years old, and which is crazy because not many people say that, but I know I'm a freak when it comes to that. And I think the first film that influenced me, that made me realize I want to make movies, or it's like whatever that is, I want to do that, was Taxi Driver. I want to say I saw that around the same time, and I think it was on cable one time, and I checked it out, and I was just put in a trance, like a lot of people who watch that movie. Like when that Bernard Herrmann score kicks in and everything, it has this haunting atmosphere to it. And then I have a personal connection too, in the sense that I have family that grew up in New York City during that time period. So they kind of told me, yeah, that's pretty accurate. And so that just kind of blew my mind, the fact that people actually existed in a city back then. So it was like a slow build to me appreciating him.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, Scorsese kind of being hailed as the guy who, made what's it called, who really put New York on the map in terms of like the filmmaking landscape. Like obviously, it was primarily L.A. before that, but obviously, came out of the film brats generation along people like Spielberg, like Lucas, like De Palma. The doors were opened by Coppola. Obviously, one of the, he's considered part of like the original film brats generation, as far as him being one of the first generation of filmmakers to actually go to film school, or as he earned. And what's it called? Let me see which one here. It's as he earned an MA from New York University's what's it called, School of Culture, Education, and Human Development in 1968, and then produced and directed his feature filmmaking debut, Who's That Knocking at My Door, 1 year later in 1967. And obviously, in addition, he's become known obviously for, the gangster stuff. The Italian American background is very, very heavy, but he's had such a wide breadth of films that have covered so many different areas. Outside of that, I think a better focus and theme of his work is the Catholic guilt that's usually found in quite a lot of his movies. He makes quite a few movies tackling, the idea of religion and religious figures in such movies like The Age of Innocence, The Last Temptation of Christ, and even did something as recently as Silence. And I think that in that, as well as the gangsters and crime elements that you find in his movies, it's more so about examining human depravity. I think it's a big theme in a lot of his movies. You see, and the thing that I enjoy so much about them personally is that they are presented in different forms. You have obviously the social isolation, and just trying to survive in Taxi Driver, the need for attention and validation, for your what's called in King of Comedy. The nonstop chase and thrill of success, regardless of who you leave behind in your path, like Wolf, as is presented in movies like Goodfellas or Wolf of Wall Street. I think those two kind of mirror each other. Recently, I think what's interesting is he's been kind of examining the idea of longevity of life, if anything. I think with his last couple of efforts in Silence and The Irishman, and I think that's why he is still so important to talk about as a director, not just because obviously of what he's contributed in the past, but what he is still contributing to the world of cinema as a whole in general. Nathaniel, what was the first time you became aware of Scorsese as a filmmaker, and when would you say that he really started to have a major influence over your just appreciation for film?
Well, that's a good question. I'm gonna have a bit of a drawn out answer, but when I entered, probably it was between my junior and senior year of high school, is when I really started to learn to appreciate movies. And it might have been closer at the beginning of my senior year, but this is a funny story. My grandmother, may she rest in peace. I ran into her at the store one day, and she was shopping. I didn't know she was there. And at this point, I was collecting a lot of movies because, like, I hear, oh, this movie's great, got to check this out, yada yada yada. So we were at the store, and I saw Goodfellas for $5, and I like was showing it to her or whatever. She's like, "You want me to buy you that?" I was like, "Okay." And so, granted, I don't think she was very old fashioned. I don't know if she would have bought it for me if she knew how violent it was. But even so, I
Probably
got
wouldn't have.
Goodfellas. It was a DVD. Yeah, but it's okay. It turned out for the best. But it was a DVD. You had to flip it over to get to the other side of the movie. I always remember it was right when Karen is like ringing the doorbell to the apartment. That was when we flipped it over. And yeah, like as soon as I saw that movie, I was just transfixed. And I'll get more into that later. But after that film, I just kind of went down the rabbit hole, and now I would say that he's probably top 3 directors of all time for me. He's one of my absolute favorites, and there's no denying that he is just like an absolute master at his craft. And there's a reason we're talking about him so highly, because he is one of the best to have ever been, period.
Absolutely. I think another thing that's really worthy of note is that just you look at like the different decades in which he's been a part of, right? And the fact that it is really his longevity. You know, people always wonder like what is it that separates like the masters, you know, from like kind of just the working guys. And obviously there are a lot of other factors, you know, talent and craft and relevance and longevity and like whatever, you know, certain types of themes and obviously just the filmmaking, the work in general, the craft. But I think longevity has a big thing to do with it. But it's not just longevity with Scorsese, right? Like I feel like the biggest difference between him and Spielberg, who I would say are probably the two that have had the 2 longest running careers as far as, you know, really getting their start in the 70s and then still making movies to today, is that after a while, Spielberg's movies all kind of started to feel the same. And I think it's kind of difficult to like really pinpoint like what it is that separates like certain of the last couple of his films, you know? Scorsese, the thing is that every single decade with which he's been a part of has felt so distinct and uniquely different, you know, like the more dirty and grimy nature of the 70s to the more weird and off-kilter ones from the 80s to like his, I would say the 90s is probably his like most commercially successful, as but also like in a way he's making like anti-commercial commercial films that people just like because they know it's him. And then the 2000s, which is what I call his Oscars decade, because that's like every time he made a movie, like it got nominated for a ton of Oscars, which finally leads to his first Best Picture and Best Director win. And then you have his 2010s, which I would say is like his return to art, but it's what I would call like his epic art phase. You know, like he only makes 4 movies in the 2010s, but every one of those movies, like you can make an argument, really contributes to like the landscape of what cinema was and where it was shifting towards. It was basically like, to me, like him making all of the movies that he had made like for like mid-budget but with like gigantic budgets, you know. And even now leading into the 2020s with Killers of the Flower Moon, is his, I believe it's his 6th decade working in film now. And the idea that he's not stopping anytime soon, the fact that he's aware of his own mortality, but at the same time is like, listen, there's too many stories to tell, you know, I got to get moving because I know I don't have that much time left. I mean, kudos to him, obviously, you know, and with such a good track record, I have a feel that we will still get good movies from him, hopefully for the next however long, you know, he is 80 years old. So with that being said, without further ado, shall we get into these lists, gentlemen?
Well, one thing, because we can't forget because you said he made 4 movies in the 2010s. We can't forget about all the documentaries that he made.
That's true. Yes. So yeah,
especially
talk about
the
that.
music ones as well. Which he obviously started doing a lot of documentaries in the 70s. Obviously, the most notable one, Last Waltz, of course, very fruitful collaboration between him and the now late Robbie Robertson. And obviously, we've seen what he's done. I mean, he's done a couple of Dylan documentaries, of course. You know, No Direction Home back in like, I want to say 2005, and then most recently Rolling Thunder Review in 2019. And then, of course, you know, George Harrison, Living Material World in 2011. So, yeah, I mean, as much as we love talking about his narrative movies, I'm not saying I think these are always on the same level, but I definitely think he's quite a great documentarian as well. And really interesting to see a filmmaker. Obviously, a lot of filmmakers do it, but I think Martin Scorsese is very successful at both. And I think that just goes to show how adept he is and as a filmmaker across all types of genres.
So now this actually brings up an interesting point. I wanted to actually throw this query your way before we get started. So are you going to be including some documentaries in your top 10 once we do it, or will this only be feature films?
I mean, they are eligible, but I won't say if I'm going to have any on my list.
Okay.
But
Ryan,
yeah, I think
there?
anything feature. What's that?
Okay. Well, I thought Ryan was saying something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I have one documentary on my list, so
Okay.
you could probably guess what it is.
Yeah, interesting. All right. This is going to make this list even more interesting than I thought. So with that being said, people, let's get to it. Our respective top 10s. Before we get started, I just wanted to throw out some honorable mentions. Like I said, unfortunately, I was not able to get to see all of them, but I did wanted to throw out big honorable mention to Silence, which is probably his most underrated film, released in 2016. starring Andrew Garfield, Adam Driver, and Liam Neeson. I think this movie is just so unlike anything that he's ever made before. It's completely captivating for a 3-hour movie about people literally grappling with their faith. I think it's probably the most on the nose that he's ever been about his Catholic guilt, but it's so interesting and so visually appealing. Like the way that he makes like people's bodies getting smashed to pieces by waves, and he makes that literally art. It's phenomenal, to say the least. I wanted to give a big shout out there. Shout out to The Aviator as well. Hugo, a movie that I think doesn't get necessarily the most amount of love, despite in a weird way, like that, I think being one of the few movies of his that actually like deserved all the praise that it got. And then a couple of the more underrated ones. 1999's Bringing Out the Dead, 2010 Shutter Island. What's it called? 1985's After Hours. 1993's Age of Innocence, and my two hot takes I will get to later on. But we're going to start off with number 10, and my number 10 is The Irishman. This is one that like kind of got like, oh, again, it's weird how the Netflix effect and just a director like Scorsese releasing a movie in the middle of the 2010s. 2019 was such an interesting year because, again, I feel like you had all these legacy directors that hadn't made a movie in a couple of years at that point, like making these big movies, and it was all like, okay, none of them were going through the traditional routes. You know, Scorsese was going through Netflix and Noah Baumbach. That was the big Marriage Story, Irishman controversy year. And the thing that I think is the most interesting about this, and why, well, this is to me not the best movie that he made in the 2010s, it is definitely one of the most signature movies of the 2010s. It's the movie that he finally made about like reckoning with your life and reckoning with the choices that you've made. And in a way, he really wasn't in a position to do that with any of his other movies concerning this sort of subject matter, because like when he makes Goodfellas, he's only like about to be 40. You know, so he's like making a movie about a guy who like goes through like the kind of beginning, middle, and end points of the gangster life. But, you know, then it naturally ends at like the cutoff, which was 40, which is like the amount of life that he known at that point. When he's making Irishman, he's a lot older, obviously. So it's a movie that's much less a gangster story and more so a story about friendship and reckoning with your mortality, you know, and the choices of your life, especially since Robert De Niro's character pretty much his penance, if you will, for the life that he's led and the choices that he's committed and the murders that he's committed is to live the rest of his life just sad and alone with all of his friends just dead around him. You know, like I said, it's so hauntingly existential that you'd almost be forgiven for like sitting through the excess length, because it's all worth it just to get to those last like 20 minutes, which I'm like, okay, after he kills Pacino, you're like, okay, that's it. You know, like if like, and the thing that I'll say is that like, if this movie had come out like 10, 20 years before, then yeah, the movie would have ended with the Hoffa killing and everybody going to jail. That's where it would have ended. But it's the fact that you get those last 30 minutes that really shows, this is Scorsese like evolving as a filmmaker. So yeah, I had to, so that for me is all good enough reasons for The Irishman to be on there, number 10. So we'll go over to Ryan next. You're number 10.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, unfortunately, that barely snuck into my top 10. It's number 12 for me. So It's really close. There's just like a couple of nitpicks I have here and there, like involving the de-aging and the technical stuff. But
yeah, that part is weak, I will admit. But thank God the rest of the movie was good enough for it, and they moved past it quick enough to where it's like, okay, not a problem anymore. But I do agree that could have been a little better.
Yeah, but I mean, I still think it's an epic film that deals with, like you said, legacy, and the idea of like this guy who, this is a character, Irishman. Frank Sheeran is someone who like isn't really mentioned much. He just kind of, he's like a tumbleweed going by, and he's forgotten. Whereas Hoffa, it's like people might mention him because he actually fought for something. But anyway, without further ado, my number 10 is one that you referenced already, Dom, and that is The Aviator. I love this movie so much. This is one of those movies. It's 3 hours basically, and anytime it's on TV or on a streaming service, I have to watch it, or at least a portion of it. I get so much out of this film in terms of what Scorsese does really well is Taxi Driver, as Tarantino calls it, the best character study of all time. He really is able to get you to feel what that character is feeling. He's able to really peel back the skin, the layers, if you will, and make you feel like you're with this person all the way through. And Howard Hughes is easily, of course, he was a real person, but he's easily one of the most interesting protagonists that Scorsese's ever discussed. Somebody who, like, uh, not just the fact that he had the success in film, but almost like his passion for aviation is kind of like Scorsese with movies. It's just he has this obsession, this sort of tunnel vision with this thing that he's become, and we see it's a part of his eventual demise at the end, or at least his fall down, and the struggle that he has with his illness and everything. It definitely takes a toll on him. I used to be iffy on DiCaprio, and Nathaniel and I have debated this before, like, because I used to think, like, I used to buy into the criticism, like, oh, is it just the fact that he was like a hot new item at the time and that they just put him in a big movie? And then I rewatched it and I was just like, no, this is one of Leo's best roles. He fully.
I told you.
No, literally, come at
What
me
did
with
I
the
tell you?
pitchforks. It was just, it's this really epic film, and I think everybody knows Scorsese knows about the scene with the milk and everything, bringing the milk and all that stuff. It really jams into your head. Um, it's an epic film for sure. I think it's one of his most entertaining ones too, just from a production standpoint. It's really impressive what they do with the flight sequences. Um, Really, really great film. And I know I didn't realize this until recently that Michael Mann produced it. So that was kind of a fun point. Also, Kate Blanchett won the Oscar, and deservedly so. Like one of my favorite lines, like they're playing golf and she goes, "Don't you find?" Like she really nails that. I know Dom's cringing right now. Oh man.
No, I love Blanchett in that movie. She's probably the best part about it.
Yeah, I think especially too. One thing we notice in a lot of Scorsese's films too is like the idea of not just toxic masculinity but toxic relationships, and we see like Howard Hughes is so interesting because he's someone. It's not that easy. To me, it's not as simple as like you see a movie like Goodfellas, and it's easy to point out, okay, these guys are all terrible. Whereas Howard Hughes, it's like, on one hand, he's this guy who achieves a great amount, but at the same time, at what cost? And we see like him alienating not just him from his from other people, but from himself as well. So I think it's a great film, and I think it's one of his most underrated films. I really think it should be talked about as much as some of his other more celebrated ones.
Yeah, Aviator's one that I gotta go back and that is definitely one that I gotta go back and rewatch for sure. Because I haven't seen it since it came out. Well, not since it came out, but since I saw it originally, which I think was, oh god, it's been some years now. It had to have been like while I was still in high school. But Nathaniel, moving on to your number 10.
Yeah, well, just to jump off that, I wanted to give a few honorable mentions if we're doing that here. So just a few here. Obviously, I got to throw on Mean Streets from 1973. George Harrison, Living in the Material World from 2011. No Direction, Home Bob Dylan from 2005. Of course, I switched the order there. Silence from 2016 was one I really enjoy. And it's funny, we've both, me and Ryan both kind of feel the same way about this film. Obviously, this would have been my number 11, but The Irishman from 2019 barely misses out. And I also, I want to mention real quick a short from Martin Scorsese, because I know we're not counting shorts in this. But if we were, The Big Shave would have made my top 10 Scorsese films.
Not New York Stories.
No, I haven't seen that yet. So
Okay.
Disclaimer. But I think that really was the first film where you understood like the themes he was going to be diving with obsession and perfection and all that, to the point of absolute detriment. So I think it captured that beautifully. But yeah, I guess I'm going to start off with my number 10 here, being Bringing Out the Dead from 1999. This beat out Irishman by just a hair, but my goodness, like I just watched this movie recently, and from like the first 20 minutes, I was absolutely hooked at how off the wall everything was in this hospital setting. People were dropping dead left and right. You got why am I blanking? Anyway, I'll come back to it. What's that?
Nicolas Cage.
No. Wait, I'm trying to figure it out. Why am I forgetting his name? Mark Anthony. His character is like running around, keeps running away from the hospital. It's like I forget who it is because it's like he's hardly recognizable in that. But I think that this really is obviously when you match Schrader up with Scorsese, it's always going to be, well, for the most part, I think it's always like a match made in heaven. And, this film has been compared to Taxi Driver, and I understand because, you got this driver in the New York streets at night, but it definitely it definitely takes a different path than Taxi Driver. And I absolutely think this is one of Nick Cage's best roles that he's done as Frank Pierce, being this burnt out EMT driver. And you really get some of the most haunting voiceovers in the entirety of Scorsese's films. I love the relationship he has with Mary Burke, played by Patricia Arquette, and how each like section of the film with John Goodman, then with Ving Rhames, and one of his absolute best roles, absolutely a scene stealer in this movie. And then of course with Tom Sizemore, who single-handedly created paramedic brutality. But yeah, I mean, absolutely incredible. This
Paramedic
whole movie.
brutality.
I mean, that he is crazy. That may he rest in peace. But just seeing the art, just seeing these characters interact, this environment, it's so hyper realized, yet it feels so visceral, so real. And the conclusion that this film comes to is really one that I think is very, very powerful. I think it gets a bit repetitive though, which is why like I don't have it higher on the list, because this could have been way above where it is right now. But I think the film does slow down, as breakneck as it is. But I mean, I don't know how you can't love this movie. It's just I think it's one of his most underrated and his most overlooked. It was a box office bomb, and I kind of find it hard to believe when a character study of this quality really is just kind of cast aside. But I think people have looked back now and have looked at it in a very, very positive light, and so that's my number 10.
Yeah, indeed. I've been meaning to watch this movie for so long now, and
It's so good, man.
I
You'll
wanted
love
to watch
I'm
it so
sure.
badly. Yeah, I know. Moving on to my number 9. My number 9 was one that I just managed to watch today. I was finishing it up. I think this is a movie that, while it's not one of my favorites the way that I thought it was going to be. Like, I thought I was going to really love this movie. I ended up just liking it, but it's just one of those movies where even though I may not have loved it, the quality of it stands above the rest and really sells it. Because the thing about it is, I think this one is probably the one of his movies that has aged the best in terms of what it's going for, and that's the king of comedy. The biggest, I think watching this made me hate Joker even more. Like, even more than I already did, because I know that like it's popular to be like, oh well, Todd Phillips isn't ripping it off. Yeah, he is. I'm sorry. Yeah, after watching this, it's like when you literally have like the ending sequence being what it is. The only difference is that Robert De Niro actually does stand-up comedy in this, as opposed to Joaquin, who just sets that whole thing up as a way to just murder somebody in front of everybody. Like just in terms of just in terms of like this movie, like actually like what it says about like the idea of like celebrity culture and the idea of obsession as a means of like validating your own existence. Where Robert De Niro's character, it's a pretty pathetic existence that he lives, but one that I feel like is not that uncommon from, let's face it, a lot of people in the 21st century. Like, that's just one of the few instances in which this movie was so far ahead of its time. The idea of like, he's trying to like reconnect with a girl from high school because she's like the only one that like kind of also never made it anywhere. Presumably everybody else that they went to high school with is long gone. They have a lot of references throughout the movie. The scene when he is envisioning having his old high school principal come on the show, and the way that the movie effortlessly bounces back and forth between scenes that are clearly hallucinations and scenes that Robert De Niro's character Rupert Pupkin has dreamed up and envisioned for forever, for the longest time. And like, there's no like clear cut transition that tells you, okay, you're in a hallucination now. You kind of just have to figure it out for yourself. But with how good the storytelling is, it becomes pretty apparent. Also, one of the best female and probably most overlooked female supporting performances of his entire canon, from Sandra Bernhard as the other like one that's obsessed with Jerry Lewis's character. This movie is just horrifically, tragically overlooked. It's one of the most different types of Robert De Niro performance. Robert De Niro's been working with Scorsese for so long now that people can tend to overlook that, like, he got some of the most different performances of, people always think of De Niro, they think of Taxi Driver, they think of Goodfellas, they think of Raging Bull, but people might be neglected to remember that the Scorsese also gave us Cape Fear, which is Robert De Niro doing a Southern accent, which should not work. And some might make the argument that it doesn't. But somehow, his performance is so good. And the same goes for King of Comedy, where he's playing effectively a loser, and Robert De Niro never, ever plays a loser. And it's so different. It's so weird. It's so off kilter. The way that the movie presents stalking is it actually made stalking scary, because I feel like so much of the time stalking is presented as being slightly goofy and comedic. And now in this one, it's nah, that shit is scary, And I love the look on Jerry Lewis's face when he just has to deal with all of this nonsense of oh my, I think that's probably one of the best instances of portraying a celebrity who just wants to be left alone, because he literally can't walk down the street without people hounding him. So yeah, that just incredibly ahead of its time. Such a smart movie, such a different kind of a movie than he usually makes. The King of Comedy. Ryan, you're number 9.
Yeah, so my number 9, I'm glad that you snuck in. I have a similar feeling to King of Comedy too. That was in my top 15. I'm glad you mentioned Cape Fear, because while I'm not saying it's one of Scorsese's best, it's one of his most entertaining to me. 100%. Counselor, come out wherever you are. So my number 9, we talked about documentaries earlier. The Last Waltz is my number 9. This is one that I remember the first time I saw it. This was one that I was aware of for the longest time, but the first time I actually watched it, my dad for Christmas one year got me a box set with a bunch of Scorsese films, and it included The Last Waltz. A couple of others were Raging Bull was on that list. And I'm trying to think of other ones. Those are the 2 that I remember in the collection. But I'm watching New York was on that box set too. But Last Waltz, I remember watching it, and I was just I wasn't familiar with the band yet. I think I had just heard The Wait, which is kind of one of their biggest names or one of their biggest songs. And so I watched it, and I'm just I really love how conversational it was, because it is just kind of like Scorsese and Robbie Robertson hanging out. But I think it's one of the best concert movies ever made. And I think that's not even giving it due justice. I think the way he approaches the concert sequences are impressive. The way the camera just kind of glides over. He was kind of shooting it in a different way too, because before this, unless there's something I'm forgetting, a lot of concert stuff really didn't stand out. We kind of just had the best that people did. Maybe Nathaniel, you're more into the music scene, so you can elaborate. But the stuff that I'm aware of before this was really just kind of bootleg Grateful Dead stuff. This was a legit film that was made around it.
No, there was. I mean, you had Monterey Pop and you had Woodstock, so there were
sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also ashamed to admit I haven't seen Woodstock yet, so that's one that I know is on
me neither. But Martin Scorsese actually edited that movie though, so there you go. Connection back to Marty.
Well, did Marty edit it, did Marty edit it, or did Thelma Shoemaker edit it?
I don't know. Well, it's credited to Martin Scorsese as the editor, which huge task, I gotta say, for all those hours.
Huge task indeed. Yeah, it's a lot of hours of film there.
So, but yeah, I mean, Last Waltz. It's I think it's one of those things too, that something tricky about concert films as well is that sometimes you're okay, is it the strength of the filmmaking that people respect as well as the music, or is it really the music that's carrying it? And I think it's both. If there's any nitpicks, it's that some of the other band members that I've heard kind of get sidetracked because it's really the Marty and Robbie story. But even then, I felt what Marty was doing was using Robbie Robertson as kind of a vessel into that world. I remember it's a movie where I love the music, but that's not even the main focus to me. To me, I just love having a conversation with this band and seeing a young Martin Scorsese at the time clearly geeking out over these guys. That was just something that I found captivating as well, just as much as other stuff.
Sure. Absolutely. No, I was going to say, to jump off of that, I think I don't quite love it to that extent, because I feel unless it's stop making sense or something, I feel like a lot of concert movies are fairly stationary, and Scorsese does some stuff to visually, flare it up. But I don't know, obviously I have to mention the Muddy Water performance of Manish Boy. All he had to do was stand on stage and move his hands, and it was incredible. And then of course Van Morrison with Caravan doing the kicks was incredible. There's a lot of great moments. But I disagree, because I think you even get when they're talking about Garth Hudson, actually the only surviving member of the band at this point, unfortunately, and just in the oldest member of the band, and kind of like his background in the music and how he kind of taught everyone. There was a profoundness to that interaction that I think goes beyond just calling it the Martin Scorsese and Robbie Robertson show, because I think it is more than that. Even though if I don't quite love it to that extent. And yeah, I mean, King of Comedy didn't make my list. I think it's a bit of a, it's still really good. I think it's a bit of a lesser extension of Taxi Driver, but then again, I enjoy Joker more, so who am I to say? But anyway, all the credit goes to Marty for that one, I will admit. But yeah, so for my number 9, I'm sure this might be on your guys' list, but I have to go with Gangs of New York from 2002. I love this epic movie. I don't think Marty has ever done it.
I win. I win. I'm not the only one.
Was that the controversial one?
No. The controversial ones are the ones that I left off the list, but.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because with Marty, it's like, you can pick anything.
Yeah.
No, I love this movie. I know it isn't Leonardo DiCaprio's best performance, but I still think he's really good in it. I love the dynamic between him and Cameron Diaz in this. And of course, Daniel Day-Lewis as Bill the Butcher is just so iconic and incredible. But I just love how he's able to capture this real life gang violence in 5 Points back in the day in 1863. It's the period detail is incredible. It's so visceral. The tension that is built up throughout the entire thing is Scorsese, showing his expertise as a craftsman in that sense. I just think this is a beyond entertaining movie that runs for almost 3 hours, but you hardly feel any of it because you're so wrapped up in the conflict, the violence, everything about it is just really, really compelling. And yeah, I absolutely love Gangs of New York, and I think it's one of his most underrated in his filmography.
Oh my God, you have no idea how happy you just made me with that choice.
Welcome.
I'll save that. I'll save that for when it eventually makes my list. Oh man, I thought people were gonna have me think I was crazy. Well, no, but I guess I'll get that out of the way now. My 2 controversial takes are that Cape Fear and Casino, I think, are his 2 worst movies. As much as I enjoy Cape Fear, I enjoy Cape Fear as like kind of being campy and ridiculous. But and for having one of the strangely greatest Robert De Niro performances.
Oh
ever.
yeah.
But other than that, like the movie to me is campy garbage, and I think it's really funny that Spielberg was originally supposed to direct that. But no, my hottest take is I am bored to tears by Casino. I think the Casino is a longer, more drawn out, like really obnoxious, like Goodfellas knockoff, and it's not entertaining to me at all. So
I agree that it's lesser, but I wouldn't say it's not entertaining.
Well, I mean,
I can't go that far.
It has its parts that are entertaining, but I guess just the fact that Goodfellas, which is just so frenetic and never stops. There's just so many parts of Casino that just feels like
you don't like when Pesci pops the guy's eyeball out on the machine.
That, and also the fact that I think that Sharon Stone, the irony being that Sharon Stone is the only one nominated for the movie, and she's the complete weak link. It makes no logical sense.
Charlie you made me pop your eye out for that piece of.
It's a complete character portrayal in that movie because we're expected to believe that De Niro is this pinpoint precise person and yet throws it all away for this clear loose cannon, which is the Sharon Stone character. Not at all any red flags going on there. And it's a little bit too ridiculous for me. But my number 8 is Mean Streets. I love to give this one credit because this to me is like where it really begins for him. He's got obviously Boxcar Bertha and Who's That Knocking at My Door, and then he has Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which gets Ellen Burstyn an Oscar nomination. That's the first actor that gets nominated for one of his movies. And kind of, but this to me is what paves for Win. That's right. But this to me is what paves the way for really his entire career. It's the precursor to Taxi Driver, to Goodfellas, to Raging Bull. Pretty much almost every theme that he wants to examine over the course of his entire career starts here. The religious symbolism, the Catholic guilt, the idea of, he's still really young in his career. So it's making it like, it's his version of like The Outsiders. It's like, the boys that kind of are refusing to grow up and the ones that are like, the ones that are trying to grow up and mature versus the ones that are just content with where they are. You've got some absolutely ridiculous stuff in here. There's points where it doesn't exactly feel that cohesive, where it just feels like it just things happening. It's more of a slice of life movie than a plot heavy one. But to me, it all works. I think the early performances of Harvey Keitel and a scene stealing Robert De Niro showing early on why he would become the superstar that he would go on to become only 1 year before his Oscar winning turn in Godfather Part 2, which to me, the fact that he has Mean Streets and Godfather Part 2 back to back are incredible to say the least. But it was the beginning of a very long and fruitful working partnership with Scorsese. And again, it deserves shout out. Like, to me, this is his memento as far as like just showing how much of a star he was going to be so early on. So that's my number 8, Mean Streets. Ryan, moving on to you.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I really like Mean Streets as well. That was also in my top 15. I'm kind of just going off like ones that were so close. But my number 8 is one you were just bad-mouthing, Dom, and that is Casino, baby.
Oh, man. Oh, man. See, that's karma. That's karma coming back to bite me in the ass right there.
No, I mean, that's fine. I understand, too, like, I completely get when people say it's a lesser Goodfellas. I understand that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's not only was it my introduction to Scorsese, but I really do think it's one of his most frenetic, quick-paced. For a 3-hour film, I think it flies by. I really love the performances in this. My only nitpick, funny enough that you mentioned, not that he's a weak link. It's funny enough you mentioned Sharon Stone, because I think this is not only her best performance next to Basic Instinct, I think she's the standout of the movie. Because she really, so Nathaniel and I, we have different things when it comes to acting. He talks about how, I mean, if a performance is good, we'll celebrate it, obviously. But Nathaniel, you've talked to me about how you respond well when an actor can convince you that they're in pain. For me, it's not even like it's a go-to thing. It's just something I respond to, where if an actor can really convince me that they are absolutely insane and this person is off their rocker, that's something that I really give credit for. And Sharon Stone sells that, because she's someone who, like, Bill Burr actually talks about this on his Monday morning podcast, how like with Sharon Stone, the relationship with her and Ace Rothstein, De Niro's character, is that they constantly call him the Golden Jew in the movie, which I think is hilarious. But like Sharon Stone's character, they both know this relationship's not going to work. She literally warns him. She's like, I'm not the type of girl you want to settle for. And he still really wants to keep her around, but they know this is an unhealthy relationship. There's a self-awareness to it, and they still let things go insane. Joe Pesci, I think, is very good. Believe it or not, even though I do think it's a very good performance, I'm not saying he's the weak link, but it's one of his performances I don't commend as much as, like, say, a Goodfellas or an Irishman, because that's an example where it seems like he's just doing the same thing again, but 10 times more. And he's still good in it. It's still very much like Tommy again.
Right.
De Niro, one of his
doing a bad Chicago accent.
I get that. He's just like over in the cash register.
Yeah.
It's really bad. It's really bad.
This is like a preference too. I also love when Scorsese leaves New York, because even though nobody knows how to shoot New York like Scorsese, it is nice to see him get out of his comfort zone a little bit and seeing him cover a place like Vegas. Just the literal money machine of the titular casino, the Tangiers. I love, first of all, some of the best production design of any Scorsese film. I'd have to do a little bit of research. I don't know how much of it was like a set as opposed to them just shooting in a casino, but they really nail the aesthetic of the 70s and all like the horrible game shows and stuff that came out around that time. And maybe it's just that I'm fascinated by that era. And I have relatives in Vegas, so they've kind of kept me up with the history of the city. And so I guess maybe there's a personal connection to it. So this is one that speaks to me as well. Also, one thing I'll say before we move on to Nathaniel is the scene where Pesci is completely going off on De Niro in the desert. The buildup to it is beautiful.
Yeah,
that
scene I'll give you. That scene's pretty great.
To me, that is one of the best scenes in any Scorsese movie. You said I'm bringing heat on you and everything. I'm just like, it is glorious. So That's all I have to say about that. But yeah, I love Casino. Sue me.
My hot take on Casino is, well, my other hot take on, not on Casino but on Sharon Stone, is that Sharon Stone peaked with Basic Instinct and never had a good performance after that. And I think history is on my side there. Unfortunately, I think it is. I don't care if she got the Oscar nomination for. I don't care if she got the Oscar nomination for Casino. She peaked with
Don't
Basic
badmouth
Instinct.
Catwoman like that, okay?
You're proving my point. You're proving my point here, dude. You're proving my point. Nathaniel, you're number 8.
All right. Well, all I have to say to you guys, show me the blueprints. Show me the blueprints. Show me the blueprints. Show me the blueprints. At number 8, I have The Aviator from 2004. Obviously, Ryan had already mentioned it, but I'll be honest. I think this is Leonardo DiCaprio's greatest performance of his career. And I think it's one of his most internalized. It's like kind of similar to what Ryan was saying about like watching someone just go absolute batshit. Like just watching someone's mental illness take a hold of them in a very raw and realistic way is why I am drawn into his portrayal of Howard Hughes, his passion, everything about him. It's another fantastic character study in Scorsese's, another notch on his belt, if you will. And I think that obviously Cate Blanchett's Oscar-winning turn as the legendary Oscar winner herself, Katharine Hepburn, is really, probably her best performance. You could even argue, but I think just how deep he dives into, the rise of Howard Hughes's career, all the way through the film scene and just his eventual downfall. I think really is one of his most compelling watches. I think it's a bit too long. It's almost 3 hours, and you do feel the length a little bit. But even so, I think DiCaprio is just so captivating in this role, and I think the film overall is, let's see. Yeah, probably. Well, no, it's not the best biopic he did. Never mind. I was thinking, I forgot of another movie. Well, a couple of other movies, actually. I think it goes to show you how great Scorsese is at doing biopics and making them the best movies ever. So not his, absolute best film in that regard, but definitely one of his best overall. And as I said, I think Leonardo DiCaprio's best performance he's done. So we'll see if he tops it in Killer of the Flower Moon.
We shall see indeed. Like I said, Scorsese could not be stopped in the 2000s when it came to the Oscars. That was finally the decade where the Oscars were like, oh, he's awesome. And it shows, because guess what? Nathaniel, you validated this being this high on the list. People have said that this is weaker Scorsese, that this is bottom tier Scorsese. And I will give it that the two leads of this movie are severely miscast and could have been solved with a very, very easy cast correction. But Gangs of New York, easily one of the all-timers for me. Pretty much echoing everything that Nathaniel said. This movie actually made me interested in like this period of history, that weird period in like between the like the late 1800s transitioning into the early 19th century, in the early periods of American immigration and kind of the wars that were fought to settle Manhattan. It's a very interesting movie, and it's not. Well, what's interesting is that, like, I think that I want to say this is the only other time that Scorsese has tried to cover historical epic. I think the only other time that he really did it, obviously, Age of Innocence, sure, but I think that's a book adaptation, so I don't know how well that really translates. And then probably Last Temptation of Christ is the only other time that he tried to be this big and this ambitious, and that one was kind of not super well received. But this one, I mean, I think that he gets everything right. I think that just in terms of presenting the immigrant story, how it builds and builds and builds and builds. As it starts as this micro quest for revenge, and then ultimately turns into this massive battle to maintain one's way of life, set against the backdrop of an event that was ultimately going to wipe them all out. That's the shitty thing, is that at the end of the day, nobody wins. Obviously, yeah, Leo gets his revenge on Day-Lewis for murdering his dad, but at the expense of what? All the rest of everybody else dies as that community is completely wiped out. It's just filled with like that beautiful idea of just at the end of the day, everything kind of gets shifted around. Nothing stays the same. Everything is constantly in this state of flux. And like I said, it's a damn good thing he got Day-Lewis. It's a damn good thing that he got Day-Lewis because, like I said, DiCaprio and Cameron Diaz are so badly miscast in the lead parts. I don't remember the last time that I had a movie that I enjoyed this much where the two leads were so miscast, because you get Colin Farrell and Kate Beckinsale for those two parts, and this is instantly like a five, like an all-star 5-tier movie. I understand why DiCaprio obviously went for it. I believe that this is the first time that he works with DiCaprio. Obviously, famously, DiCaprio gets the 1-2 punch this year of getting this and Catch Me If You Can, which I also think is another fantastic and underserved performance, at least in terms of the awards race goes. But yeah, the Gangs of New York is one of my absolute favorites. It's one of the biggest. It's one of the most ambitious that he's ever gone. And yeah, I love it. So it had to be on my list.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys are talking up Gangs of New York. It's not that much lower on my list. It's like right outside of my top 15, but I still hold it in high regard with Scorsese. So that's one that's grown on me. And really quick, I wanted to ask, Colin Farrell and Kate Beckinsale, were they like considered for the roles, or
no? I don't think they were, but I guess my thought process being that like Colin Farrell was like pretty big at that point. He had New World, he had Phone Booth, and he had the big one obviously is Alexander, which I think was shooting around the time, and Kate Beckinsale obviously was like right about to hit it big with Underworld. But I was just talking about more so in terms of like their star power of what they were at the time, and just like how much better they would have been, obviously, as two people who are actually Irish as opposed to DiCaprio and Cameron Diaz, who are both very much not Irish. So,
well, no, I was just gonna say, because I think that's perfect casting. Like Colin Farrell was like hot off of, like you said, Phone Booth. I think was the same year.
Yeah, well,
and
just about.
Yeah, around that time, and Kate Beckinsale as well. That would have been great. But I mean, of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, that performance. Do I even have to say he's great?
Yeah, like come on, we all know.
That's like a
He's just that's
a given.
That's the only time I've ever seen. Like I always see like co-lead situations where somebody's bumped down to supporting, right? That's the only time I've ever seen a supporting character get nominated for lead, because that's how overpowering he is in the movie. Only time.
No.
I've never seen it happen with anybody else.
Oh man, no, but yeah, it's just
Anthony Hopkins, you could say.
Sure. Yeah.
No, but I mean, that's great. I love that film as well, but my number 7 is another historical film. It's one of his religious films, and we've talked about it a little bit. That would be Silence from 2016. This is a movie that I love very much. I really regret this because there was an event that I believe my high school was a part of or had gotten invited to, where they were doing a screening of Silence in Manhattan, but for a couple of reasons I couldn't go. And I regret that because I don't know if Scorsese was there, but I think Adam Driver was at that event. And so I still regret not going to that to this day. But I think this is one of his best efforts. I think it's one of his best directed films. For a film that's almost 3 hours long, there's this precision to it. Every shot in this matters. I think going off of The Aviator, Silence is one of those films. I think that Andrew Garfield, he plays one of the most interesting protagonists in a Scorsese film. He's somebody who's tormented, who kind of, in a way, even though he's following the priesthood, that is kind of like what Scorsese was doing, because he was almost going to become a priest, and then he decided, no, I'd rather channel my love of film instead. And I definitely think it's one of his most personal films, even though, of course, it's adapted from a story. The idea of wrestling with the Catholic guilt, of this idea that even though I've made mistakes or I'm being forced to do something against my own will, does God still love me? And one of the most emotional scenes to me, maybe because I did grow up Catholic, was the scene where he's supposed to step on the sign or the image of God, and he just hears the voice of God saying, like, step on me, I still love you as my child and everything. This film was so powerful. My parents chose to have me go to a Catholic school when I was younger. And my mom she was baptized, but she's not exactly religious. And the ending was so powerful to her. Spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but I'm assuming Spoilers are out the window for the show. But this movie was so powerful to my mom, who, even though she's not necessarily of the faith, the movie ends with Andrew Garfield at his funeral, and he's still holding a cross. And it was so powerful to my mom that she said that made me want to go to church. And so it's something that even somebody who doesn't necessarily follow the teachings or anything, it can still speak to somebody on a deeper spiritual level. Definitely some of the most disturbing imagery in a Scorsese film, and necessarily so. I think that for people who are mixed on Last Temptation of Christ, I think this is kind of like a step above that in terms of he seemed a bit more confident in how he wanted to convey his view of religion. And it just feels like all the pieces clicked a lot better. I'm forgetting his name. The younger character who's always like screwing up that Andrew Garfield wants to help out.
Oh yeah, that guy.
Chichio or something like that.
Yeah, Chichiro or something like that. Yeah.
I know he's like, again, he's another character who it's like he repeatedly goes against the beliefs of the others. He's always like getting into trouble. And yet Andrew Garfield, as frustrated as he is, he's kind of like a stand-in for God in that relationship.
Kichichiro, that's his name.
Kichichiro, yeah, thank you. He's kind of like a stand-in for God, where it's like, you're really pushing my buttons, but you're still one of us, so I gotta love you and everything. And I gotta say, before Nathaniel, I just wanted to mention one of the most captivating things to me that kind of sums up the entire movie, the opening alone, where Liam Neeson is being tortured and you have the priests that are having the water sprayed on them. It's an example where this movie could have gone into the torture porn territory, but Scorsese's a smart enough director that he's not going to divulge into that too much. But it's a scene that, again, going off of the pain of the actor that, Nathaniel, I know you respond to, they really nailed that. And I think even for someone who's not religious, you can understand the conflict. You can get behind it. So sadly, it wasn't very successful commercially, which is no surprise to me. It's a 3-hour religious movie. So not a lot of people are going to watch that. But I really think it's one of his essential viewing pieces, and I love it. So
yeah, I mean, to jump off that point, like, compared to that and Last Temptation of Christ, I am more mixed on that movie. And as I said, it was one of the ones that didn't make my top 10, but it's certainly a honorable mention for me. It's one I have to revisit, actually, because it could go up for me. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, biggest thing for me, obviously. I mean, I love this movie so much. It was tough for me not to be able to put it in the top 10. I go back and forth all the time as far as whether that should have been my number 10 or Irishman. But weird thing about the 2016 Oscar year, man, that was a year where it's like the right people were all nominated, but for the wrong movies. Like, you had a bunch of people getting nominated for movies, but they were in like other movies that like they were better. Like Andrew Garfield gets nominated for Hacksaw Ridge, but I almost would have preferred if he had been nominated for Silence. Same with Ryan Gosling. He's nominated for La La Land, and I wish he'd been nominated for The Nice Guys. Which to me is such
I get that. I get it.
It's such a superior performance. If you
ask me, I wouldn't go that far. I like him, but I get it. I get what you mean.
Yeah, you get where I'm coming
Let's
from.
Let's not start this.
Yeah, it's always on whenever it's me and Nathaniel. It's always on like Donkey Kong. Anyways, Nathaniel, you're number 7.
Okay, so my number 7. I don't know if you guys will have this on your list. But my number 7 is After Hours from 1985. This movie is an absolute fever dream. Very, very Fellini-esque in regards to just how, this one night gone wrong becomes so surreal. And obviously Griffin Dunn is one of his best. I mean, what is he doing now?
Neighborhood Playhouse alumni.
Great. Yeah. No, I love him in this, and just all the characters that pop up. The late John Hurd as Tom the bartender is always a great presence. And then, of course, Cheech and Chong are in here. Rosanna Arquette, Terry Garr. I mean, so many great names. But I absolutely love just how bonkers. This might be Scorsese's most bonkers movie. But I just love the way it flows. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I can't really speak on how much, in regards to the plot progression, but just how this night keeps getting worse and worse and in the most compelling and in engaging ways possible really makes it stand out. And I think you could say this is his most underrated film, though. I think there's a few that could give it a run for its money, but yeah, I think everyone should see After Hours if they haven't seen it already, because I think it's one of his absolute best.
Yeah, man. Oh, another one I wanted to. I wanted to watch this one so badly. I had like plans. I just could not
Oh, dude, you'll love
get
this
to it.
one too.
I know this. I know it's. I'm so sick of saying it's on the list, but don't worry. I'll get to this one eventually. My number 6. Just again, it's another thing. It's weird because Scorsese doesn't usually do like sequels really, but oh man, it's just like the one time that he did. I mean, this movie's not technically a sequel, but it's a sequel to The Hustler. We all know it. It's The Color of Money. This has got to be like the sexiest movie
Oh, it's a
that
sequel.
Scorsese has ever done. Oh my god, like this is just like first of all, like if this doesn't show that like Paul Newman like still had it like in the 80s when he was starting to get a little older, then I don't know what does. But the other interesting thing about this movie that I think is so amazing is like this is like a passing of the torch in terms of like movie stardom. You don't get these types of movies where you have like kind of like the older star like kind of passing off the torch to the younger star. I feel like the closest that we get to this after this is in Crimson Tide 1995 with Gene Hackman to Denzel Washington. The difference being that Denzel was already kind of a star by that point versus Gene Hackman was like, kind of on his way out, like as far as he's like getting closer to retirement. This time, you get Cruise only a few years into his career, working with arguably, one of the best directors working at that point. Scorsese is obviously in his weird, like 80s off kilter phase, and he works with Newman, who gets to reprise the role of Fast Eddie Felsen, who has clearly like gone on to do all the things that they hinted at the end of The Hustler. And now you get this like weird, interesting push-pull back and forth where he thinks that he's going to be like the mentor to this kid, but then the kid ends up being like, oh, he might actually be better than him until he like hustles him at the end. And then it's like, oh no, now you're like, now you're starting to challenge my ego a little bit there, So that happens, like all little lessons and tools and tricks that he teaches him throughout. And really, it's amazing how it starts as like a mentor-mentee movie and then turns into like a cat and mouse game by the end of it. And Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, definitely easily the sexiest that she has ever been and anything. And that weird, like psycho, like sexual relationship that she like sort of has going with Paul Newman, with Cruise and the back and forth. Oh, it's just like this movie is pure sex. It is pure sex on a stick. And I absolutely love it. It is After Hours. I'll give you After Hours, Nathaniel. But like, I think that because that movie has kind of had like the late, like career, like, sorry, the late like revisionist movement as far as like the internet like finally recognize it and it becoming more of a cult movie, I'd say that The Color of Money is his more underrated movie because I think this is the only one of his movies where people have to be like, oh, Scorsese directed that. Like they almost forget that this is one of him.
I forgot.
This is the one that I forget that he directs all the time, at least until I saw it. And yeah, this movie was awesome. So
I will say it's actually one of my least favorite Scorsese movies. It's fun. But then again, it's still like it's for one of my least favorite. It's still good. Like, I think that says a lot to Scorsese as a filmmaker.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ryan, moving on to you. Number 6.
Oh man, yeah, my number 6. Well, I just want to say After Hours I've been meaning to rewatch, but that's a great one. And I am so happy that you have Color of Money on your top 10 because I love that movie so much.
It's so great. It was so great.
And it's like perfect. It's perfect that you say pure sex because our mutual friend, Mark Paul Marine, he says pure sex all the time and he's obsessed with that movie.
I think it shows. I think it shows. Look at that.
Oh, man. But yeah, my number 6 brought this up earlier again, but this is one that I have a real close connection to for more reasons than one, and that's Hugo from 2011. I really adore a lot of this film. The first time I saw it, I was young. It's funny because like it's a film that's made for kids, but I feel like I've appreciated it the older I've gotten. This is one where this is arguably Roger Ebert said it best in his review, as Roger Ebert always says it the best, but like, or not always, because he gave Die Hard 2 stars, but Hugo, what I loved about what he said was that Scorsese, we know him for his religious films. We know him for his gangster epics. And yet Hugo is probably the closest to his heart. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Scorsese talks about how he was kind of like a sickly child, or he was alone a lot of the time in his apartment in New York City, just kind of looking out the window and picturing like what the world was like. And the images of Hugo inside the little clock tower in the train station, that's essentially Scorsese as a kid, just kind of reinventing it in a new way. There's so much to appreciate about this. I think as a kid, I was fascinated by it, but I didn't know what to make of it because um, I can understand some people there's a shift where it's kind of like this fun adventure film, and then suddenly the second half of the movie just transitions into the history of cinema. So I know that can like kind of be jarring for people. But now that I've gotten older, it's one that I've actually gone to rewatch the most. Anytime it's on a streaming service, I usually take the time to watch a portion of it. Um, I just love his personal connection to Georges Méliès, and it's this film that's not just about the it's not just about celebrating what's come before. This was kind of like the start of legacy. And the idea of Georges Méliès coming out of his shell once again to celebrate not only his own work, but the passing of the torch to this young boy in Hugo and his granddaughter, I believe. Or is it his granddaughter or his daughter?
It's his niece.
Yes,
His
his
niece.
niece.
Sorry, yes, I know that they're affiliated, but like the idea of like him passing on this knowledge and this gift of cinema to them, it's so beautiful. The tribute when they have all the silent films playing at the end is
Oh,
some of the most
so good.
see like you can already tell it
Yeah.
gets the heartstrings going. And Sacha Baron Cohen like could have easily just
Yes.
been like a slapstick character, but they even do stuff with him as well. Like right, but one of the best moments is when he's about to arrest Hugo and he's crying. He's like, "Please, I have to do this." And he looks at Emily Mortimer. He's like, "All right, I'll let you go." And just little character moments like that. Um, Another thing too that I really uh, it find fascinating is the technical aspect. This won visual effects at the Oscar that year,
And
and
cinematography.
yes, and cinematography. And one thing I appreciated was Scorsese. This was his venture into 3D, and what he was kind of saying is one thing I admire about Scorsese, not just for this film but going forward, is that he's not this old cranky director who is kind of like pushing new stuff aside. He's just like, no, like 3D digital, like this seems to be where the industry is going. Let me try that out. And what better way to celebrate the past than by embracing the new? And so he uses technology like 3D, maybe some in theaters in 3D, but the effects are pretty incredible in this. It would be interesting to see a play because very few directors like James Cameron's one of the few, and I know Ang Lee with Life of Pi. They're one of the few that can actually pull off 3D and make it look convincing without it being a distraction. But Hugo, it's a loving tribute to the history of film. It's a great adaptation of the children's story, and it's just maybe one of his most wholesome films too. I don't know. I really
It's like
like
the
it.
only family. It's like the only fun for the whole family movie that he's ever
No.
made.
It's
know?
easily his most wholesome and his most emotional film, I would argue.
Yeah.
But
All right.
so number 6 for me is a film where I'll put it this way: if you want to do a remake, have Scorsese do it. Of course, I'm talking about his Oscar-winning Best Picture film, The Departed from 2006. This is a film that I've come back and maybe some of you are surprised it's this low. But this is a film I've come back and appreciated on rewatch because just the tale of corruption in this police unit and everything going on in the mob in Boston. I just think it's absolutely insane. The cast here, the first time and only time that Martin Scorsese collaborated with Jack Nicholson, and it's awesome. And of course, I mean, DiCaprio yet again on his A game. What a great year for that guy between this and Blood Diamond. I mean, he was popping off. Mark Wahlberg and maybe his best performance that got him an Academy Award nomination. Alec Baldwin's also amazing in this. Of course, Matt Damon is amazing. I mean, you could go on and on. And of course, Vera Farmiga's role in this really is one of the most just that back and forth between her and DiCaprio and her and Damon is one of the craziest psychological flexes throughout this entire film, and the dynamic how she plays into their lives is absolutely amazing. But I just love how, messy this movie is. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but just how all these things, maybe there's some threads that I don't, follow all the way through to the end. but maybe it will just take another rewatch to check that out. Also, Martin Sheen, got to give props to him. I mean, there's so many people in this cast. It's amazing. But I think it's one of his thematically most mature gangster movies. And I think one of his most tragic in many, many ways. It has I think the ending to me is a bit bizarre. Maybe I have to think about it a bit more. Of course, when Mark Wahlberg's character comes in and kills Matt Damon's at the end, but just trying to like play catch up with who's infiltrating who and what's going on. It's done in such a complex way, but underneath there's a lot more going on that kind of elevate it to just another remake. I still need to see Infernal Affairs, but I really think The Departed is an absolute watermark. And I yet again, it's like, is this the movie he should have won for? Maybe. But I mean, he should have won way before this. But it's good that he finally has, a Best Director accolade to his name, as well as a Best Picture winner. Because I certainly don't think this is the best film of 2006. I could name like 3 movies that I'd put above this, but it's still an awesome Scorsese film, and I think undeniably one of his best films.
It's kind of crazy because so often we talk about movies that like are kind of win Best Picture and like they don't work as well in hindsight. And I feel like in any other instance this would be, but even though you're right, this probably isn't better than Little Miss Sunshine or Children of Men.
Well, it is
Pan's
better than Little Miss
Labyrinth.
Sunshine.
I don't know.
The
If
Children
I
of
go
Men is
that
the only
far.
one I'd put above it.
I don't know if I'd go that far. Little Miss
Yeah,
Sunshine
I
is
would.
pretty perfect from top to bottom, but
I'd
no,
have to see it again.
but that's still my favorite movie from 2006. I'm like, I'll get to that. Like, I shifted things around spiritually. That's my favorite Scorsese movie because it's just the one that I've rewatched the most. It's the one that's got like the best lines. It's the most off kilter. It's some of the most ridiculous moments that shouldn't work, but they do. Why don't you give me 2 pills? Great. Why don't you give me a bottle of scotch and a handgun so I can go blow my fucking brains out? Are we done with this psychiatry bullshit? Oh my God! Don't get me started. We'll be here all night with me with Departed quotes. I mean, we're already gonna be here all night. It's already midnight, but screw it.
Yeah.
We're still going. We're only halfway through. Ryan, you're number 5. Oh wait, no, it's on me. My number 5.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Departed. We already talked about it. I'm not gonna add too much more to this. It's it's my number 1 in spirit because I love this movie. I think I've seen this movie more than any other Scorsese movie. I think this is like the first like major. It's like either this or Goodfellas that like really like introduced me to him. It was like, oh man, yeah, this guy's really gonna be one of my favorite filmmakers. It's just everything going on it is pitch perfect. From Jack Nicholson's again, like he had, I don't know what it is with DiCaprio and it's casting certain people. Like he finally has Jack Nicholson and he has him doing one of the most incomprehensible Boston accents I've ever seen. It's so bad, but it's so entertaining and it's so funny. And everything DiCaprio is so good in this movie that like I often question why they nominated him for supporting. Like, because I know it was the same studio that was doing this in Blood Diamond, and they wanted to put him for lead for Blood Diamond, and rightfully so he got it. But the choice to put him for supporting for this movie is so baffling. When it's like, so who is lead? Damon? I'm pretty sure DiCaprio has more screen time.
Yeah, he definitely is the lead, I would say.
But if not for one other entry, this would be my favorite DiCaprio Scorsese collaboration. And the cast, it's all great. It's just everyone is just going so over the top and just giving 110%, some kind of needlessly so. But it's like just the one-liners in this, like Francis, you really should see somebody. I'm the guy that says there are guys that you can hit, and there are guys that you can't hit. Now he's not quite a guy that you can hit, but he's almost a guy that you can hit, but he's not quite. But he's mostly a guy that you can't hit. So, like, some of the lines, half these lines are improv. Anyway, the fact that they have Mark Wahlberg for 4 days on this movie, and he gives arguably like somehow overskirts like everybody else, with giving probably like in a way like this is kind of a lazy performance because he's literally just playing all the cops that would beat the shit out of him when he was a kid, but in a way that also makes him the most acclimated for this performance. Also, oh my God. This is he's just like my theory on Feds is that they're like mushrooms. Feed him shit and keep him in the dark. Like it's great. And the world needs plenty of part. I'm done. I'm gonna keep going on with just the one-liners. But I think my point is made. I forgot this is my number 5. That's how much I love this movie. The Departed, my number 5.
Wow, this is perfect because my number 5 is shocker. Stop. The Departed.
I knew it. I knew this was going to happen.
I'm not kidding.
We hit the trifecta. Okay, so I think I know where I think
I'm not fucking around. No, it's just
So we're the guys who do our jobs. You must be the other guy.
no. Oh my! Again, see, that's a testament to how much we
I've
love
used
this
that
movie.
line so many times in my real life. It's ridiculous.
Oh my God, he's just like
I feel
my
very
favorite Martin
underprepared.
Sheen. Do you want to be a cop or do you want to be a peer as a cop and everything? I think my favorite scene in it, I mean, we're just going to basically just hang out and talk about The Departed the rest of no, but just to keep things going, I'll speed it up. I think it's one of the best edited Scorsese films because it's such an intricate plot and there's a lot of moving
Elma.
pieces. The way it moves and everything, I think that the screenplay is really tight, some of the best acting, and even Jack Nicholson with like an if you feel like he has an iffy accent, I think one of the best acted scenes in any Scorsese movie, maybe one of my favorite acted scenes, is when he's questioning Leo about whether he's the rat or not. And he goes, I've got this seething fucking rat. And he's just like, and it brings up questions. That scene is absolutely mesmerizing to me every time I watch it. But yeah, this is one of my dad's favorite movies too. This is like one that he'll just watch all the time. So yeah, I have all those quotes that you have. He's like, that's what we call a paradox, and everything. Everything about this movie is so good. Also, just shout out too. Talk about the big cast. I always forget Anthony Anderson's in this movie too.
Right?
So
Yeah.
yeah. Oh man.
Oh man.
But yeah, great movie. It's properly The Departed. That's the only way to say the title.
Yeah. You guys know of the alternate casting that almost happened for this movie, right?
No,
How
what was
you
Brad Pitt was
originally
supposed to be in it,
you
right?
originally almost had an alternate movie where you had Brad Pitt, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, Mel Gibson, and the RZA instead of the cast that we got. The only original cast member that we would have gotten was what's it called? Was crap, I'm forgetting. Was DiCaprio. Brad Pitt was originally supposed to be the Matt Damon part, but then he decided he wasn't right for it because he was too old. It's unreal. And
completely different movie.
And another one of my, I just wanted to shout out, the famous the dildo porn theater scene, which Nicholson said had to
That
be.
scene's hilarious. Oh my God.
Which Nicholson stated clearly had to be in the movie. The scene where
he's like, God, Mark, when they meet Frank Costello near like that parade, and he's just like, I can't wait to wipe that smirk off your face. Wouldn't you rather instead?
No, when it's like, let's not spill any excess tears for dead guineas or something like that. And then when he kills the couple in the beginning, he's like, she felt funny. Like,
oh my God. And then the fact that Nicholson wanted to keep that in, he's just like, I want to sell how crazy this guy is.
I think one of the greatest stories that Matt Damon has ever told is telling the story of how translating that scene where he kills the two people in the beginning from the page to the screen, and how Nicholson apparently made up all of these things for that one scene that like weren't in the script originally, and just watching the way that he like added it to it, it's just, he was like, yeah, I was watching a master at work. He was basically calling all the shots that day. And yeah, we gotta stop talking about The Departed because we're gonna be here all night.
It's going to be another hour until we finish.
Exactly.
No. Well, we're entering my top 5 now, and my number 5 is actually a film that was on Ryan's list, and that is Hugo from 2011. I legitimately think this is one of his best movies for all the reasons Ryan said and more, because it's the closest to his heart. It really is. Like it's him indulging his love of cinema and his love of film history and preservation. But it really tells a very touching story about a boy, trying to find a family. Like you could say the whole the structure is a bit weird in the beginning where you get the flashbacks with Jude Law as his father. I think that part is kind of like, okay, why did he insert it here? Like I get why it's there. It just feels a bit awkward. But other than that, I mean, just all the supporting characters, of course, young Chloe Grace Moretz, and of course, you got to give a lot of credit to Asa Butterfield, who I think one of his best performance and really put him on the map after The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And I think one of Ben Kingsley's absolute best roles is George Méliès. And just how this movie turns into such a loving, embrace of one's previous work and looking back in time and remembering what drove you in the first place. You know, especially like that scene when you watch the late Helen McCrory in this, who's really great as Mama Jean. Mama Jean, who's married to George Méliès, just so beautiful. Some of the most intimate and emotional moments in any Scorsese movie. And like you said, Sacha Baron Cohen, great comedic side character, and his dynamic with Emily Mortimer is really beautiful because obviously like he has like the brace on his leg, and you kind of learn that he was in World War One, and he was hurt, and then they kind of bond over. She's like, oh, I lost my brother in the war, and you get moments like that that really, I think, rises above being a children's film, and especially the fact that it's so well shot by Robert Richardson, and deservedly won him the Oscars. Like when Hugo's going into the clock for the first time, I think the tracking shot is very reminiscent to the Copa shot in Goodfellas. You could say there's a lot of stylistic flair in this that does scream Martin Scorsese, yet it is the most atypical film in his entire filmography. But really, by the end, as much as it becomes a loving tribute to silent film and George Méliès and the genius he was by pushing the medium forward in so many different ways, it really is a touching story, like I said, of a kid trying to find a family. And yeah, I've never been more moved at a Scorsese film than this one, and that's the reason I think it's one of his absolute best. Maybe not quite on the level as the next four we're going to talk about, but certainly I think definitely in his top five, if you ask me.
Yeah, easily. I'll be interested to see if we end up all having the same, if not similar, top four. But moving into my number five, my number four. Now I keep forgetting that I started Raging Bull. I'm assuming that this will not be the last time that you see this entry on this, but yeah, this is, I think, when we talk about like Scorsese's pantheon, his pantheon right here, this is easily in there. I think there's I'm like, the thing about it is Scorsese's got so many great movies, as we've clearly been talking about throughout the course of this list, that when it comes to like, okay, what are like the ones, it's really three. I would argue that Wolf of Wall Street deserves to be up there as well, but it's really the three. It's Taxi Driver, it's Goodfellas, and it's Raging Bull.
Yeah.
He kicks.
That's shocked at the four.
Right. Well, it kicks off I mean, it's just my personal preference. I guess just in terms of it goes back to the rewatchability. The three that I have above this, I would go back and rewatch all these. Raging Bull's a little bit heavy on the heavier side, but it's just with how much it has to cover. This is kind of the one that really sets it off as like, okay, he's also, in addition to everything else, is also the best when it comes to doing biopics. This is 4 years after Rocky, and it's like the complete inverse of Rocky, where Rocky is telling a story of triumph and persevering against the odds, and this is like the complete opposite, where you're just letting time and your own awful habits just eat away at you alive until you literally have nothing left, because Jake LaMotta is just such an absolute miserable human being. Like the fact that like you're able to like spend this much time with this guy and not be repulsed should tell you how good of a filmmaker Scorsese is. But like, I mean, this one got all the accolades, so there's really not too much that I really have to say about it. Obviously the black and white tracking shot, the one shot that he took like he had like over 100 takes of as well. This winning Robert De Niro his Best Actor Oscar as well. Again, he kicks off the 80s with this, and he kicks off Goodfellas with the 90s, and that should tell you exactly what kind of an influential filmmaker he was. Raging Bull. Now the only question real that I have is, should it have been Taxi Driver or this movie that got him his first best picture / best director knob? I think Goodfellas is pretty succinct as far as like being locked in. We know that should have gotten it, but in terms of like, if we had to pick just one, Taxi Driver or this one, which would it be? And I'll leave.
Why can't it be both though?
Well, it could, but I guess just in terms of like, you look at like what they lost. Like, I'm not exactly mad that Rocky won, but you could also make the argument in 76 that like Network is just as big and as relevant a movie versus 1980. Like, you look at all the other movies that are nominated, like Elephant Man is the one that I can see being closest. Like all the rest of the movies, they're good, but like Ordinary People, that like they're all good, but like none of them to me like are better than Raging Bull.
It's not better, but I think Ordinary People, I can see why it won. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
for sure,
Scorsese should have won Best Director unquestionably for this movie. I think that's like the long time conclusion,
Yes, absolutely. So Ryan, going into you for number 4.
Yeah, and just to cap things off too, I will talk about Raging Bull later, wink wink. But one thing I wanted to say was it's funny how it's Spielberg and Scorsese, we talked about them being like the two head honchos in a way, and they had similar cases at the Oscars where like Spielberg should have been nominated for Jaws, Scorsese should have been nominated for Taxi Driver, and then it was their later efforts, Spielberg with Close Encounters, and then Scorsese with Raging Bull. It's like they finally got nominated, but it still wasn't fully embraced yet by the Academy. Not sure why. Maybe they felt like these guys hadn't proven themselves yet, but all that aside, my number 4 is The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013. This is easily the fastest 3 hours anybody ever watched. It is so damn entertaining from beginning to end. I understand too, a mutual friend of ours, Jefferson Pan, I'll throw him out there, a good friend of ours who also was a film lover and was in our program at school. I understand he's not usually a fan of stuff that's a little too grimy, or because, like, let's face it, we're dealing with really serious sleazeballs in this movie, so I can understand turning someone off. But if we're just judging it as a film, this movie, it almost felt like a return for Scorsese, because at this point, you know, he had done some documentary work. He did Shutter Island, which is a thriller. And then he did Hugo, again, the closest to his heart, a very wholesome, it's meant for families. This movie kind of felt like, yeah, and this was just like, okay, I'm back to doing crime films, because it's not gangsters, but they're still criminals at the end of the day. Let me do that. And he is just on fire with this movie. It has one of the best soundtracks of all time. Leo DiCaprio, easily one of his best performances, maybe the best of the 2010s, if I'm being honest, next to Django Unchained.
Right. For him.
Oh man, and I can't go Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because that's up there too. He had a great decade. We know. But yeah, somebody who, again, like Sacha Baron Cohen, I know not an atypical comparison, but it's a similar case where Jonah Hill could have been like the goofy side character with the glasses and everything, but even he has dimension to him. Like, I remember rewatching this with our good friend Al, and what I learned was that I remember when I was younger and I saw it for the first time, I kind of crept in because my parents tried to get me to not watch this movie. They're like, the debauchery in this, you're not going to watch that. But I kind of crept in because my grandmother let me watch it, and it was
grandma.
I know, she had like a Blu-ray over, and she's like,
Yeah,
I
think it's safe to say grandmas are winning this podcast for sure.
Oh yeah, they are. Grandmas rule the world.
Grandmas rule.
Unintentionally so or not, they are.
No, but like even him, like I remember rewatching the movie, and I'm like, yeah, this is really entertaining. They're sleazy, but you know, there's an energy to it. And it really affected me towards the end, like that second act low point where it's like, you see the destruction of his marriage, a marriage that was kind of born from kind of ill will to begin with, because earlier on, the person who was giving him the best advice and was looking out for him the best was his ex-wife, was his first wife. She was the one who actually was giving him valid advice. And then, of course, he goes, oh, hot blonde. Then he just goes for her and ditches his wife, the person who's been with him even on his down moment. So stuff that you really need to pay attention there. This is on a technical level one of his best edited films to date. I think that this movie has a brisk pace. It is so, I know you love saying this, Nathaniel, it is so tight. It's just every scene perfectly leads from one to another. I think it's easily, without a doubt, and I don't think this is controversial, I think most people say this is easily his funniest movie by far.
Oh,
without question.
Leo, when he takes the dated Quaaludes and he's just like, I was crying so hard the first time I saw it. Jordy, are you high? And he's trying to unlock the car and everything.
Oh, you forgot the other greatest line in that movie. What's it called? I will not die sober. Get those fucking loots.
Oh man. I have been a rich man and I have been a poor man, and I choose rich every fucking time.
I'm not leaving. I'm not fucking leaving.
Oh my god.
Rob
Reiner's even great in this. You get like side characters like him, and they like completely steal their scenes. I've waited 2 days for the freaking Equalizer.
No, that's not even the best part. It's like $12,000 worth of sides. What are they? What are these sides? What are they? Cure cancer? Yes, they do actually. They do in fact cure cancer.
Shut the fuck up. Stop. Oh my god. It's so good. Oh man, it's
Oh,
great. It's just an all-around great movie,
Oh,
and
man.
it's one where I can understand it turning people off because of the subject,
yeah.
but it's just so damn good. It's such a great watch,
Prudes are the only
honestly.
people who get turned off by this movie. Prudes.
Yeah.
Oh
Because of
my
course.
god.
They'll get the movie with
Oh,
the scene with the guy getting the blowjob in the elevator, and there's like, yeah, fun fact, that guy actually ended up killing himself like later on that year.
No, and John Bernthal, when he's trying to get the server, he's just like, "Can we get some ketchup, please? 4 times. Oh, now she's running and everything."
Oh my god.
oh my goodness.
Oh
Well,
man, and another one where we'll be here all night if we keep
Sell me
quoting
this pen.
well, I was going to say we are going to keep talking about it
Oh,
because my
boy.
number 4 is The Wolf of
It's
Wall
also The
Street.
Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah. I mean, how can it not be? I mean,
Yeah.
dude, it just I gotta mention Matthew McConaughey alone.
Yes, I didn't mention that. That's like one of the best scenes in the movie.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's
Where
like
he's displaying it, where
could
he's
have been nominated
explaining
for an Oscar for literally that one
for that scene alone. That scene alone.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
also the fact that you have like these insane performances coming from these guys who are in it for one scene. Like McConaughey's in it for like the one scene. Kristen Maloney is only in like 3 scenes, and then they just leave.
Yeah.
And, like you never see these guys again. You know?
Would you guys
And
agree though that the best? So, Nathaniel, I know this is your turn. I just wanted to say, would you agree that the best scene in the movie is the scene on the boat when he's talking to the FBI agent?
it's a great scene.
Okay,
But
I just
my
think like it's one of
personal
the
favorite
best. Yeah.
scene. Well, I'll get into it. I'll get into it. But as I said, this is complete fucking debauchery, and I absolutely love almost every second of it. It's just so damn entertaining. As you said, one of Leo's best performances. I would go back and forth between this and The Revenant for his best of the decade. But then again, that's like some of the greatest performances out there just in general. He's so entertaining as Jordan Belfort, and you really get a sense of how much of a sleazebag he is, and everybody else from the beginning, like Donnie Azoff, played by Jonah Hill, and probably his best role. So fun, especially the scene at the party.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Steve Madden. Steve Madden.
Oh my god! And all the stuff that they're saying about Margot Robbie, you're like, these guys are awful.
Oh my, it's
Awful.
so horrible. And then the fact that he married his
He
cousin,
starts-
that's a whole other thing.
Save that. Put a pin in that. Save
Oh,
that.
No, but I mean, just everybody.
Wait,
in
let's
this
watch the
movie-
Ludes work on Donnie right now. In slow motion.
I will
And he just
say,
whips out his dick and starts jerking off like right in the middle of the party.
this movie's nuts. But I think maybe because you asked me what I think the best, well, maybe not the best scene in the movie, but it could be probably one of the funniest scenes in all of cinema is the scene when he takes the Quaaludes and then he's like trying to save him, and then Popeye comes on the screen. He's like going for the cocaine. The first time I saw that, I was like in tears laughing.
You just hear the theme in the background.
You know? I just lost my shit, and I just love how after it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad, and then you see all the mess he made on the way.
This movie is the definition of the, oh, you think it's as bad as it can get. Oh, just wait. Hold our beer.
Oh,
There's
my
more.
Oh yeah.
Dude, and it's just so like as funny as it is, it's so tragic in many ways. But I want to say you can make the argument that the best scene in the movie is what you already mentioned. I ain't fucking leaving, like that is, and we've seen the meme. I mean, it's such a pop culture landmark. I think this is one of those movies that everyone watches like, oh, this is just so fucking awesome, you know? And I absolutely love, of course, put Margot Robbie on the map. My goodness, what a debut performance. I think she's even Oscar worthy in it. And
Yeah.
obviously, as time goes on,
That to
she's
me
been
is one of the
nominated.
biggest Oscar snubs of that year, is her not getting nominated for that movie.
Yeah, because
Oh
that's
yeah,
one of
and
the biggest
she
snubs of that
nails
year.
the accent
Yes.
too. Definitely.
Yeah, who is this blonde? Oh my goodness, the accent's crazy, especially considering she's Australian. But it's like, who is this blonde bombshell? Obviously, you knew from the beginning that she was going to be a star after this. And I think if Barbie doesn't tell you anything, I mean, obviously, time has shown that she is so well regarded and one of the best we have today. I could go on and on and on and on and on about how much fun this movie is, but really the tragedy of, like this, these stock investment schemes and how you see how this life, like this is what Scorsese does so well with all his movies. It's all fun and games until it stops being that. And I think as fun as this movie is, it does show the downside to living this debaucherous lifestyle. And of course, you gotta love the scene, "Sell me this pen," and then the way they bring that back around at the end, where you see how unhappy Jordan Belfort is with his life. It really does go to show just this is more than just a fun movie where guys just do fucking horrible things the entire time. It really, I think Scorsese has a lot to say about this world and about this lifestyle. But man, when you're in it, it is one hell of a good time. I've got to say, this is so close to being a masterpiece, an absolute masterpiece for me. And yet again, like, yeah, this has to be in top 5 Scorsese movies. I mean, how can it not be?
Easily. The only thing that I'll add to that as well about the Margot Robbie discussion is that one of the greatest like just acting lessons for me in general that comes from this movie is Margot Robbie telling the story of how she got the accent, which where her acting coach literally told her, just literally think of your nails, just think that you just got them done and just talk about them. And that just helped her nail the accent. And it's so crazy because I started like subconsciously doing that. And then I started like doing the Brooklyn accent. I'm like, holy fuck, that actually works. Okay, that's crazy. And then also I did
some time.
and then I think that one of the funniest tidbits that had nothing to do with anything that happened in the movie, but outside of real life, is that supposedly, I don't know if this is actually true or not, but supposedly after the movie came out, every single player in the NBA like immediately followed Margot Robbie on Instagram, which I think is just one of the greatest things ever.
Wow.
I believe it.
Oh man, I'll save that. So we're as you guys can tell, we're an hour and a half into this, so we're gonna go really quick. I'm actually gonna speed through. I'm gonna combine my 3 and 2 into one option as well.
You can separate them. It's okay.
Well, no, I want to do it because they kind of go hand in hand. We already talked enough about Wolf of Wall Street. I only have so much more that I can contribute to that. But that's my number 2. My number 3 is Goodfellas. Obviously, again, it's the classic, it's the iconic one. It's the one that everyone remembers. It's the one that people go back and forth all the time. It's like the perfect like merging point for Scorsese of his artistic endeavors and like him being at his most commercial level. I think it's perfectly it's at its peak with this movie as well. Obviously, people go back and forth all the time. The fact that it didn't win Best Picture over Dances with Wolves. Obviously, that's still being debated to this day, but I mean, just the cinematic relevance of this movie, all of the shots that came from this, all of the Italianism that came from this. This was like kind of like the next in like what they call like the Italian American trilogy. This is kind of like the successor to The Godfather, and kind of held that spot in the lexicon for a while as far as being like the go-to like gangster crime movie. And also, again, just telling the story that like continuing that age-old story of crime doesn't pay, but in just one of the most interesting ways where Scorsese purposefully frames each section of the movie to like feel and emulate something different, which is something that I feel like kind of goes overlooked now, but is one of the most important aspects, where the movie feels so sleek and shiny and sexy in the first act when he's coming up, and then the middle act, things are kind of like they're kind of mundane, they're kind of stale. He's going through the motions. He's in jail. He's doing this. He's doing that, and then the end just becomes like this nausea-like fever dream where Henry is just like trying to like avoid and outrun everything until it finally all catches up to him. It provides for some absolutely incredible performances as well. Obviously from De Niro, from Pesci, who won the Oscar for this, and from Ray Liotta, rest in peace, obviously. It made him a star. And yeah, this is one of the most important ones. The Wolf of Wall Street, I mean, I just had to hop on the bandwagon because we were having so much fun talking about it. But I think that if I can add my 2 cents to what has already been discussed, the tightest 3 hours that I've ever sat through. Again, it always blows my mind when I feel like I'm only 20 minutes in and I'm an hour and a half in. It's so entertaining. It's so ridiculous. It's so debauchery. I disagree with you, Nathaniel, when you say this is close to being a masterpiece. This is a masterpiece to me. This is like one of the easiest. This is one of the easiest 5 stars I've ever given a movie out of 5. And in terms of the acting, everybody gives DiCaprio credit for the lewd scene. I want to go for something a little bit more underrated. I think DiCaprio should have won the Oscar alone for being able to maintain a straight face when Jonah Hill was telling him the story about the cousin shit. Like, oh my God, like how he didn't get up and walk away, that alone was absolutely insane, because like Jonah Hill is just telling it so matter of fact, and you can tell the look in his mind. DiCaprio was like, this dude is an absolute fucking
the thing is, we grew up together, and she grew up hot, and I'm not gonna let my other friends screw her, because like it was the cousin was like an in thing for me. And you're like, what is he saying right now?
And then he ends it with like He's like, oh yeah, well, I guess if we would have a child that would turn out like, not right. We would take him out into the country and we would just let him go. We'd be like, go, you're free, we go frolic in the grass and then he's like, now we have 3 kids together. It's great. I'm just like, oh man, after that scene alone, ever since the McConaughey scene wasn't already one of the greatest things I'd ever seen to begin with, that scene alone was, I'm like, yeah, this is one of the greatest movies ever made, easily. So yeah, I kind of grouped them together because they kind of like do function like similarly enough to each other, but The Wolf of Wall Street is just completely just unhinged, batshit insane. Yeah, that's my 3 and 2. So Ryan, your number 3 and number 2.
Yeah, so going down the ladder, number 3, I have Taxi Driver, and number 2, I have Raging Bull. So the 2 Robert De Niro films. It's funny, the Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and King of Comedy are kind of like a unique trilogy of movies where like he's the focus and everything. They're all set in New York City, and they tackle like different personalities from these guys. And I gotta say, Taxi Driver, it was one of the early ones that I watched. I think Casino was the first Scorsese film I saw like from beginning to end. But I was aware of Taxi Driver, and I remember watching it and just being completely transfixed. There's like, even though they show this horrible nature to New York City in the 70s, because it does kind of function as a time capsule for that period. But also New York very much was like what we see, like what people know of as Gotham City in the Batman universe. That's pretty much what New York was in the 70s. And except it was real. Like, and so just the imagery of the city and the like the porno theaters and all the drugs and everything and stuff, they really capture that well. But there's also like this beauty to it. Bernard Herrmann's score definitely amplifies that scene. And I think that it really is a testament to not only the creative team behind it, but also the humanity that Scorsese has, where he can focus on characters that can be characters that can disturb us, creep us out, and disgust us, and yet he has such a human approach to every character he portrays. In fact, Nathaniel and I were just talking about this recently, that Red Letter Media, when they were doing their review of Wolf of Wall Street, we've talked about that movie enough, so I won't mention it again. But what I will say is that they had this good comparison where that year Michael Bay had Pain and Gain released the same year as Wolf of Wall Street, and they're just like, although I believe you're a fan of Pain and Gain, if I'm not mistaken.
I love Pain and Gain. Love Pain and Gain.
This is interesting because I'll just say, generally speaking, it wasn't favored by the critics. But what I will say, is that they pointed something out why a story like that works coming from Scorsese, and why, at least in the eyes of most people, Pain and Gain doesn't work for Michael Bay. And they just show these 2 clips going back where Scorsese's like, it's easy for us to distance ourselves from other people and say, oh, that's me, I would never do that. But in actuality, it is us. And maybe if we were born under different circumstances or came from different backgrounds, we could be making the same mistakes. And then it just cuts to Michael Bay going, these guys are just a bunch of knuckleheads and everything, like acting like a frat dude, bro. And I guess if you watch the movie from that lens, maybe it works. But, I don't know, not to like criticize your love of that movie. I'm just saying, like, Wolf of Wall Street, I just think there's no comparison. But,
I mean, I don't think it takes I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that that Wolf of Wall Street is a better movie than Pain and Gain.
Oh yeah,
like, so, I don't think that's too difficult to figure out.
No, but yeah, just Taxi Driver. It's just he's this really disturbing character. Jodie Foster is incredible for a child star in this, and the fact that she goes toe to toe with, even though De Niro, well, actually De Niro did make a name for himself because he was an Oscar winner at that point, but she's going toe to toe with him, and she's like impressive. The scene where they meet for the first time, I love too. It's one of those movies where apparently it was booed at Cannes when it premiered and everything, which is it's ridiculous to think about that now, but it's like, one thing I love about Scorsese with this and movies like Wolf of Wall Street too, he makes movies that are potentially dangerous and how they can be perceived. And we need more of that. And this is a film that I really think is bold. It's unique. And it set the template for, you mentioned Joker earlier, big budget comic book movies like that are being inspired by Scorsese. So that goes to show you the movie that the impression this has left on film. Um, and yeah, Raging Bull, really quickly, you mentioned it earlier, Dom. I think one of the best acting showcases of all time.
Yeah.
De Niro gives one of the most legendary, most giving performances I've ever seen in a film. The down People talk a lot about like specifically theater, but also film. Like when you're putting yourself out there, it's a very brave thing to do. The places that De Niro is willing to go when he's just being absolutely despicable to his wives or to even his own brother when he beats him up, to the scene when he's in the jail cell and he's just pounding on the wall. Stuff like that to me is like, it's like we all have those moments where we're like, this is cinema and everything. Well, every time I watch Raging Bull and I see De Niro, just any scene, whether it's the scene where he's asking Joey to hit him or the scene where he's in the jail cell, or even when he's doing like the open mic at his bar and everything in Florida, I'm just seeing that and I go, that's acting. Like that is how you act. And everybody else is great too. I think Kathy Moriarty is excellent. Joe Pesci, and talk about one of the best acting debuts of all time. The fact that
after that.
yeah, because he had a music career before that, right?
Little Joe, he sure can sing.
But I mean, the last thing I will say, and I haven't talked about her enough on the show, but I'll wrap it up by saying Thelma Schoonmaker, the GOAT, one of the greatest editors of all time. Scorsese's films just are not the same without her. They just don't work. And this is one of the best edited films ever made. Maybe
I would
even
say it's the best.
Maybe even the best. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's perfect jumping off point because my number 3 is Raging Bull. It's a masterpiece, and I think De Niro, it's the greatest lead performance in any movie. Like, to me, just one of the most complex character studies of an absolute horrid individual, like we've already mentioned. And I absolutely love the scenes like where they're like showing him getting married and like they show all the scenes in color and then they cut back to him in the ring, and it kind of signifies it's like he had it so good, but yet it's like it's that fight that's in him. His rage consumes him, and that's all that drives him forward. And my goodness, that scene in the cell where he's punching the wall is literally the greatest acting I've ever seen in any movie, hands down. The greatest acted scene of all time. And I just think it's just watching this character's spiral in descent into absolute loserdom is just so compelling to watch, so tragic, and yet as horrible as he is, you still have some shred of sympathy for like you're like, yeah, you deserve to be here, but somehow Scorsese's able to pull the humanity out of Jake LaMotta. And I really think, just as I said, the best edited film of all time. The only films I would put close to that level, probably I don't know, Citizen Kane, Star Wars, Baby Driver, Everything Ever All at Once. Like, there aren't many films as incredibly edited as this one. Just the fight with him and Sugar Ray Robinson, and of course the cinematography, and that dolly out, that's also kind of like a low angle shot. It just absolutely blows my mind every time I see it. I could go on and on about this movie, but similar to you, Dom, it's not as rewatchable as the 2 movies I have above it. It is a lot to take in, which is why it's not like at the top of my top 100 of all time, but it certainly has to be in there. And undeniably should have won him at least Best Director and probably Best Picture as well. But I would have taken Best Director because that's crazy. But Thelma Schoonmaker got it, so we're good there. And of course, my number 2 being Taxi Driver from 1976, which is another Robert De Niro performance that should have won him an Oscar. Really, I mean, these 2 performances I'd put in the top 10 greatest performances of all time, which should show you why De Niro is like one of the greatest actors to ever live. And I think this might be, if you don't count On the Waterfront, funnily enough, how that connects in, this is the greatest character study of all time. Just this picture of absolute loneliness and seeing how that lack of social connection can consume someone, that obsession. Yet again, this is where it really comes to full form with him and Paul Schrader's script here, which I think is just absolutely phenomenal. Like the shot, to me, one of the greatest shots in all of cinema that I think really tells the whole movie is when he's trying to call Betsy, Sybil Shepherd's character, on the phone, and they just pan out to that empty hallway. Blows my mind every time I see it. Or when he's watching the dance scene where Jackson Brown's Late for the Skies playing is one of the greatest epitomes of loneliness I've ever seen. Even Martin Scorsese is amazing in the one scene he's in, is that incredibly demented and deranged taxi driver passenger. And just the obsession on how Travis wants to like be able to fix Iris's situation. Obviously, Jodie Foster's character in an Academy Award nominated performance, and how that ties into the whole ending, as he almost killed someone. He almost killed a politician, and had he had done that, he would have been seen as an absolute villain. But since he killed a pimp who was into child prostitution, he's seen as a martyr. But yet you could take that as this is all in his head and he died. I like to think of the latter because I think, or the former, because I think it says a lot about how our society reacts to situations like that, and how we perceive different individuals for, taking out other people who perhaps we find lesser than, and just how one small action could recontextualize how we feel is absolutely mind-blowing to me. I really don't think this is one of my top 20 favorite movies of all time. It's an absolute masterpiece. Every time I come back to it, I'm just transfixed and blown away by De Niro. The fact that Scorsese wasn't nominated for Best Director is one of the biggest snubs in the history of the Academy Awards. That is fucking bullshit. Only thing
I'll say to that is you look at who was nominated. Those are some masters that he was going up against.
Right,
but even him being the new kid on the block, it was a tough race to say the least.
But even John G. Alveston, like as great as Rocky is, I understand why Rocky won Best Picture. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. But for Best Director, like it's not even close to the same level of directing in craft that is put in his film. And that's not a knock at Rocky at all. That's more of a compliment to Martin Scorsese at the absolute top of his game here. I don't think he's made a better directed movie than Taxi Driver. It's kind of hard to argue it.
Yeah, that's my number one, Taxi Driver, and then I'll let you guys do your respective number one because I know you guys are probably gonna have the same choice. Yeah, this is the one that I keep coming back to because this is tough. Obviously we could have gone from any one of these top five. I'm pretty sure we all have like relatively the same top five. Just about. It's gonna make this easier when we do the combined ranking. But yeah, this is the one that I keep coming back to. This is the one that solidifies him. This is the one that's this to me is his unequivocal masterpiece. I know a lot of people would go with Goodfellas, but the reason why I go with this one to me is because this one doesn't have any of the flash. This one doesn't have any of the glitz or the glamour. It's just down to earth. It's dirty. It's raw. Yeah. It really was like exposing people to like a type of person that like really they were like unaware of, the dregs, the ones who get ignored, the loners, the ones who like don't really have like this big, it's ironic that he makes so many movies about Italian Americans or their emphasis is so heavy on like, growing up with that very strong family unit. But like, you get the guys who don't have that, who again, they're coming back from Vietnam and to a country that hates them for no reason because of the political ambitions of that the media machine is put into them. And he's forced to just like survive and just experience the world as is. And then obviously, because he's so delusional, he ends up like believing himself to be like this white knight savior figure, when not even 20 minutes earlier, he was confused as to why a woman would no longer be interested in him when he took her to a porn theater. But like, but it's the fact that he has that kind of cluelessness that makes him so human. It's one of the most human movies I've ever seen, if that makes sense, because we always kind of, as a species, especially as we've kind of, grown more distant from each other because of obviously the radical advancement and increase in technology and our use of it, how we kind of are we kind of are surrounded by people who we never know what they're really capable of, and the fact that Travis as a character has become so memorable for the actions that he takes in this it shows that like Scorsese was like tapped into like a caliber and an element of humanity, if you will, that like I feel like so previous other filmmakers and so previous other people just are in general. And I also love the fact this makes him an absolute G. The fact that the way that he got it past the censors was he made the shade of red that he used for the blood splatter just slightly more muted, and that was how he was able to get it past the censors. It's absolutely genius. You know, obviously the supporting performances from Sybil Shepherd, Jodie Foster, Harvey Keitel, Albert Brooks in his you know, couple minutes of screen time. And again, the scene with Scorsese himself, where as almost to kind of remind you, always twisted and crazy as Travis is, there are still some other people out there that might be a little bit crazier than him. You know, it's just like it's a perfect like. It's like a nighttime voyage, you know, in a strange way. And it was obviously not the last time that Scorsese would revisited it, but this is it exemplified it at its best. Yeah, Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
It's easily the best film he's ever made.
And no, that's completely fair, man. I just want to chime in too. The Bernard Herrmann score, like Ryan mentioned. I mean, what a way to go out! Like in one of the greatest film scores of all time, maybe his best. It's between that and Psycho. I don't know. It's tough to say.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to cut you guys on time right here, but we are almost at the 2-hour mark. I believe this officially makes this the longest live stream podcast in the history of the show. Definitely we're hitting a record time here. So I know that you two are probably going to have the same number one. So let's make this fast and furious. That way we can cut through and get to the and get to the combined list.
No. Should we say it together? Goodfellas.
Goodfellas. Yeah.
No. I mean, what or you should go, Ryan, before I say anything.
Yeah, I'll be quick with it. I just think Scorsese was already making incredible work, as we've discussed already. From this, he made some of the best films of the 70s and 80s, and he was such a young guy. By the time he was 40, he made Goodfellas, and I just think in terms of what we know of Scorsese, I think he really perfects his craft with this one. Excellent performances all across the board. The fact that Ray Liotta wasn't nominated for this, I think, is a shame, because I really think he gets to show his acting chops here in more ways than one. Joe Pesci deservedly winning that Oscar. One of the best performances of all time is this demented guy, Tommy. Lorraine Bracco is excellent. Also happy she got nominated. This film was perfectly edited. It's shot with such a great energy to it, something that we talk about a lot in Scorsese's films. And it's one of his funniest. When shit hits the fan, you really feel it, and you feel that lull and that drop at the end. It's an incredible film, and it's essential viewing for anybody who wants to. If anybody's new to the world of film and wants to appreciate it more, you have to watch Goodfellas.
No, I mean, like I said, when I put that on for the first time and they shot Billy Bats in the trunk, you just hear Ray Liotta say, "As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster." And then, oh my goodness, I was drawn in immediately. The late Tony Bennett, rest in peace to him and Ray Liotta. It's just absolutely amazing. This is one of the most, as you probably who have been watching here, seen the Nathaniel Ahart Company's top 100 greatest films. This was like number 4. So obviously a lot of people see this as Scorsese's best. And you're right, Dom. It's the perfect mix between that commerciality and an artistic statement, because I think it's his most accessible film. It was the one that I got into from him, but I just think the film that portrays the mob the best. I think the ins and outs, the inner workings, the glitz, the glamour, the pizzazz. I mean, it has everything. One of the greatest soundtracks of all time. I mean, And He Kissed Me has been like immortalized with that Copa scene, with one of the greatest tracking shots of all time. Always You Too, I see you in here, you know, like when he's walking through. And one of the most quotable movies of all time. Funny how? Funny like I'm a clown, like I'm here to amuse you? What's so fucking funny about me? My goodness, you give me the papers, you know. Jimmy 2 times. But yeah, I mean, you could go on and on. Ray Liotta, I mean, what a star-making performances. He never had a greater role in his entire career. Like you said, Lorraine Bracco as Karen in this is amazing. But Joe Pesci, I'd say top 10 greatest performance of all time, is the absolute psychopath that is Tommy DeVito. Just the scene where he kills Spider is one of the most shocking scenes in all of cinema. Like, I remember the first time I saw it, I was just blown away at how, you know, the lack of feeling and he's just like, I'll dig a hole. I don't give a fuck. Like it's crazy. Why? And I think that's a scene that really brings it down. It's like, no, like there's as much fun as there is to be had in this lifestyle. This is not the way to live. And I just think there's so many scenes that exemplify that so beautifully. I could go on and on about this movie. It's one of the most rewatchable movies of all time. Like if this is on, you're going to sit down and watch it, because even whenever I think, oh, I'm sick of it, I need a break from this. Like 6 months later, or like not even 6 months later, I'm like, okay, I got to rewatch Goodfellas sometime soon. It's just one of those movies that's so ingrained in pop culture. And I think really as much as I think Taxi Driver might be a slightly better directed movie, I mean, there's no knocking Goodfellas. It's really one of my favorite movies of all time, and I could go on and on and on about it as I've already have. But yeah, I mean, what can you say? It's a masterpiece, and I think proves why Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest filmmakers that has ever lived.
Indeed. All right. So we've reached it, the moment of truth, the combined top 10 list. So the good thing is that we've made our jobs a little easier, because between the three of us, I believe that we have 5 entries in common. That being, of course, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, The Wolf of Wall Street, and The Departed. What's it called? I believe everything else we've got a couple that you two have in common as well. And but I'll get to that in the meantime. So in the meantime, I think it's safe to say that those are our top 5 respectively. So in terms of it, so we go with doing Goodfellas at 1 and then Taxi Driver at 2.
Absolutely.
And then I'm assuming Raging Bull at 3, Wolf of Wall Street at 4, and then Departed at 5.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
All right, so there's that. There's that. There's that. And there's that. All right. So now the rest of our respective 5. So Nathaniel, your other 5 that you had Hugo, After Hours, The Aviator, Gangs of New York, and Bringing Out the Dead. Ryan, you had Hugo, Silence, Casino, The Last Waltz, and The Aviator. And I had The Irishman, The King of Comedy, Mean Streets, Gangs of New York, and The Color of Money. I think it's safe to say that automatically, because 3 of those entries had at least 2 people. You two both had Hugo and Aviator, and then Nathaniel, you and I both had Gangs of New York. I immediately opt that those 3 are on the list, just in terms of law of averages. So what do you say? Hugo with 6, and then we'll figure out, and then we'll figure out. Yeah, Aviator, and then Gangs, and then we can figure out
Gangs in New York. Yep.
Where the last ones rank. God, that makes me so happy that Gangs of New York is going to make the combined top 10 list. That's just awesome.
That's great.
That's just fantastic. All right, so now as far as the rest, in order to fill out those last 2 spots, I am willing to drop for 2 of mine. I am willing to drop The Color of Money, and I am willing to drop The King of Comedy, but I want The Irishman and Mean Streets to still be in consideration. So now, Nathaniel, pick 2 that you are willing to drop out of the last one. I believe you only have, oh, no, I'm wrong. So you only have After Hours and Bringing Out the Dead left. So I would say pick one of those to drop.
I'll drop out Bringing Out the Dead.
All right. And then Ryan, for you, you have The Last Waltz, Casino, and Silence. So pick 2 of those to drop.
Last Waltz, Casino, Silence. I'm willing to drop Last Waltz.
Okay.
And I'll drop Casino.
All right. So that leaves Silence. That leaves After Hours. And that leaves, for me, The Irishman and Mean Streets. I'll go ahead and I will drop The Irishman for Mean Streets. So that leaves those 3. So Mean Streets, Silence, or After Hours. What are the 2 that are going to get the final 2 spots? If I could go and vote right now, I will make this easier for everyone, and I'll drop Mean Streets, because I think that Silence and After Hours both should absolutely be on there. So if you 2 are good with that, then I say we go ahead and let's finish this thing. So
yeah,
Silence at 9 and After Hours at 10.
I kind of want
other way around. Oh, other way around.
Yeah. If that's cool with you.
You good with that, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right.
Cool.
This is automatically, once again,
Inglourious Bastards. I'll take that bet.
Literally, it shows that Scorsese was such a powerful director. It took 3 of us in order to come up with an accurate Hall of Fame. But I think that we did it, because without further ado, people, the official Talking TV, Nathaniel Ahart, Ryan Maguire, Rye Guy, whatever your YouTube channel name was, you'll plug it after the fact. Hall of Fame, without further ado, is Number 10, Silence, 2016. Number 9, After Hours, 1985. Number 8, Gangs of New York, 2002. Number 7, The Aviator, 2004. Number 6, Hugo, 2011. Number 5, The Departed, 2006. Number 4, The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013. Number 3, Raging Bull, 1980. Number 2, Taxi Driver, 1976. And number 1, Goodfellas, 1990. And with that being said, people, that is it. That is it officially breaks the record. I believe this is the longest podcast live stream that we have ever had on this channel. Thank you guys for sticking with us all the way through. This was long, but it was very worthwhile. Ryan, Nathaniel, thank you guys once again for coming on. Ryan, your first time on. You had the pleasure of being on the record-breaking longest podcast ever. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yes, you guys can follow me pretty much every social media. I'm Ryan T. Maguire, but on YouTube, my YouTube channel is Ryan Movie Guy. And when Nathaniel and I are together, you know it's going to be a long conversation. So, and I knew you'd agree with that.
Indeed, but listen, if listen, I will say I don't want there to be any misconceptions about this. I had an absolute blast with this, and you're welcome back anytime. In fact, I hope to have you back on sooner rather than later. Nathaniel, my friend, my co-host. We put together 2 Directors Hall of Fames. You're going to be on later this week for the 200th podcast episode. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Well, obviously, if you're watching on my channel, Nathaniel Ahart, and of course, Nathaniel_Ahart on Instagram, Twitter, or X as they call it nowadays, and all over the place. And of course, if you're tuning in on my channel, you got to subscribe to Talkin' TV. If you like the style, if you like the movie nerd, Dom Rizzi himself here, please check it out. And we're going to keep this going for some time, I can imagine. And I'm looking forward to the future for sure.
Absolutely. Like I said, Nathaniel, as far as I'm concerned, you are a part of the Talkin' TV family. Ryan as well. The 3 of us, we've known each other for quite a long time, and I'm glad to see that this relationship will continue to be fruitful as time goes on. You can, of course, follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin' TV podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Go follow Nathaniel and Ryan with everything they've got going on. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts in just a few hours because it's already 1 o'clock in the morning here. Wow, that shows how late and how long we have been going here. As always, people, from myself, from Nathaniel, from Ryan, 12 seasons and a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys on Tuesday for the 200th podcast episode. Take care.